Matthew 5, verse 33 is where we're going to start in our section here. How shall I treat others is the title of tonight's lesson 26 in our study. And most of the text is the same that we looked at earlier this morning in our sermon period, but except for the first 5 verses or so, about oaths. Let's remind ourselves again about the context. We might call it the context. Verse 20, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus has been going through and raising the standard, if you will, or at least correcting the standard. Either one of those could be just equally accurate, I guess. Relationships in life many times brings challenges. Just simply being in any kind of relationship, not just what we might think of as a relationship, but any kind of human-to-human connection. Acquaintances, any human interaction has challenges of its own. And whenever we're dealing with people who may not be kind to us, it makes those challenges even more complicated. It's very difficult to be nice to somebody who is not nice to us. It's very difficult. It's hard not to retaliate sometimes. But based on Jesus' words in these sections, we're going to look at how we should treat other people, how we should deal with our human relationships. What does it mean to treat others in a correct way or a proper way? Got a few things for each of these sections, or each of these groups of verses at least. Starting with this, treating others right involves always telling the truth. Always telling the truth. Somebody would be interested or willing to read verse 33 through 37 for everybody, please? Okay. Here he goes again with you have heard that it was said. And what they heard that it was said was, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform whatever you swear. But I say to you, don't take an oath at all, he says. And then he says, don't take an oath by heaven. Don't take an oath by earth. Don't take an oath by Jerusalem. Don't take an oath by your head. We need a little backstory here, a little explanation. The Jews had come to a point where they had made, more or less, they had created these devices that allowed them to do what they believed was getting away with not having to fulfill an oath. And the way they did that was, among other things, they would say, well, it depends on the thing by which you swear determines whether or not you have to do that thing. The one that I think they would all agree is that if you swear by the name of Jehovah, you are bound to keep that oath, period. But what about other things? If I swear by the earth, that's different. So I can swear by the earth. In other words, they had turned this game into a way to evade keeping their word. Jesus is making a reference to those kinds of things. He says, don't swear by heaven. After all, heaven is the throne of God, he says. Don't swear by the earth, because the earth is his footstool. Don't swear by Jerusalem. It's the city of the great king. Don't swear by your own head. And the implication seems to be that people would make oaths by the, something to do with their hair being black, or something like that. Like, I swear by my hair, my black hair, or whatever, and the implication would be, like if you don't keep it, your hair's going to turn gray or something, or white. It says, basically saying you can't make your hair white or black or anything like that. But his point is, these oaths, just rather than saying keep your oaths, he takes that a step farther and just says don't even use them at all. But what are oaths for? What is an oath? Why would somebody swear an oath? What kinds of situations, or what were they used for?
Legal validation.
Okay. Legal validation?
Which, in this context, as little kids, if your fingers were crossed, you could tell something that wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
But as adults got older, we call it the small print in contracts.
Yeah, the fine print. Got to look at that fine print. Or the really fast talking at the end of the radio ad. I don't know how they get away with some of that stuff.
Exactly.
You used to have to hire somebody that could talk really fast. Now you can just speed it up on the computer to where it doesn't even sound like words. Get away with that, yeah? There's some important stuff in those fast words. That's why they're fast. Because they only have 30 seconds and they got to cram what they don't want you to hear in the last, 3 seconds. So oaths, I guess you could say validation in general. People would swear oaths because they're trying to get whoever they're talking to, whoever they're dealing with, to believe them. Whether it's you're vowing that something is true or that you're going to do something. And what are some alternatives? What circumstance in life could there be that would actually make oaths unnecessary? Okay.
Or you might say, I promise that will.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't have to say that.
Yeah. Why? How come?
Because your word should be good.
Exactly.
Yes or no.
Yes, exactly. That's the point. And I think that is Jesus' point. We're talking about character. Your integrity of character should be enough, that should be so that people know that you are truthful, that whatever you say is either true or at least you think it's true. Sometimes somebody might solemnly be able to vow or whatever that this is true, but they could be wrong. They thought that was true. But that's really beside the point here. The point is, you should have such a character that all you have to say is whatever it is, and people know this person would not say this if he wasn't going to do it or if it wasn't true. So we're talking about a character, integrity, not a word formula or anything like that. But Jesus says, just let your yes be yes. Or actually, I'll take it back. He just says, what you say be simply yes or no. Now, James sort of expands upon that later on in James chapter 5. But how can you let your yes be yes and your no be no? By having a character that backs up whatever you say. Therefore, you won't need to make an oath to back up what you're saying. Your character will back up what you're saying. Yeah, Joe?
In the Old Testament, and I can't find an example right now, they had that custom of, well, may this be done to me 10 times over or whatever if this is not true. Do you remember? I mean, that was said often. But yet, like with Jephthah and even King Xerxes, I mean, if they made an oath, they kept it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where that custom came from. When people seem to understand that oaths were important.
Yes, and oaths themselves are not necessarily evil. And the law, that's one reason, I'm sure, why the law of Moses did not forbid them. It forbade swearing them falsely. That's why he said, you have heard that it was said, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform to Jehovah, to the Lord, whatever you have sworn. Well, maybe we should have started with this, that one thing that Jesus is not talking about is formal civil oaths and, in a court setting. For one thing, a person's character, what is necessary in order for somebody's character to be enough? Exactly, yeah. You got to know the person. And in a court setting, that's not necessarily going to be the case. Probably isn't going to be the case. But yet, some courts, many courts, have, built in a conscientious objection where you don't have to do it. They will let you affirm. But in my opinion, frankly, it's the exact same thing. It's just words. But if somebody felt, if it pricked their conscience to say, I swear, then they can say, I affirm. And it's a win-win. And we should be thankful that they allow that, or at least at this point. But Jesus is really getting down to a character, really talking about somebody's character, the person's character. Let what you say be simply yes or no. You shouldn't need to go through all these things. But how can we know that certain oaths or that all oaths is not necessarily what he's talking about? Well, first of all, God himself has sworn many oaths, even by himself. He swears by himself. Hebrews 3:11 and verse 18, Hebrews 4:3, Hebrews 6:13 through 18, and 7:20 and 21, and then in Luke 1:73, Acts 2:30, Deuteronomy 32:40, then in Isaiah 62. It's very, very many Old Testament passages. God swears an oath by himself. Or it is stated that Jehovah has sworn by himself. He also, in other places, spoke of it as a good thing, like in Isaiah 65, verse 16, and Jeremiah 12, verse 16. Jesus confessed under oath that he was the Christ, Matthew 26, 63 and 64. Paul often called upon God as a witness to some truth that he has proclaimed. That's a form of an oath. Revelation 10, 5 and 6 says that God will send his angel to swear. And so whatever Jesus is talking about here, we have to interpret it in light of this reality of these other passages which throw light on this. And that's where we come to the point, taking that into consideration along with how the Jews used oaths to get around performing. It's the exact opposite of what oaths were supposed to be used for. They have used them in such a tricky way, kind of like that fine print concept, fingers crossed, to not do it. And Jesus calls them out for that elsewhere, maybe in Matthew 23. So something to keep in mind. Sometimes God commanded men, in the Old Testament at least, commanded men to swear by him. So, I'll just read this quote. The obvious meaning is that a Christian's word is his bond. He does not need to reinforce his words with any oath or any appeal for heaven to witness, or by any other device to underscore the truth of his remarks. Speaking the truth in love is a badge of true discipleship. Falsehood, evil speakings, slander, backbiting, gossip, and idle talk of all kinds are surely prohibited to the child of God. Speaking the truth in love, those are Paul's words. The Christian should speak the truth in love. And that means, we might think he's talking about the gospel, but he's not necessarily talking about the gospel. He's talking about the truth, whatever the truth is. Just speak the truth. How much better would the world be if people would just speak the truth in general? Nobody would have to worry if they're lying, if they're deceiving them or trying to, if they're up to something, just speak the truth. Mm-hmm.
Well, the word love in that phrase is obviously the agape one of doing something for the betterment of someone else. It doesn't mean you have to have a mushy-gushy feeling about it.
Yeah.
Because
Caring about them.
I remember the first time I had to tell somebody that a loved one had died. It's like they'd gotten punched in the gut. And it's like, could I have said it nicely, more in love or whatever? You just have to say it. It's not going to change anything.
Yep.
What's done is done.
Eventually there could come a time where you just have to be blunt. And it's obviously not the first thing you want to do. That should be a last resort, but it may be that it comes to that point. And that is love. That is assuming that it's coming from a place of love in the heart of the person. That is an act of love. Telling somebody the truth is an act of love. As strange as that might seem to us at times. So another quote says, Jesus says that our conversation, our behavior should be so honest and our character so true that we would not need crutches to get people to believe us. Words depend on character, and oaths cannot compensate for a poor character. The disciple of Jesus is not to honor his word merely because it's supported by an oath, but because it is sustained by an integrity of character that will honor any and every commitment. That's the point here. That's the key. The using of an oath is, in this context, is implying that your character, that you have to do that just for somebody to believe whatever you're saying. And if you need to do that in order for somebody to believe you, then there's more that you need to fix. There's a problem here, and the problem is obviously that your character alone is not good enough to back up your word. So if you say, I'll do this, and somebody's like, I don't believe you, must be a reason. And it might be their problem that exists, why they don't trust you, but it might be your problem. And therefore, the need for oaths, you should live in such a way that you would never have to do that. That's the key here. Just let what you say be simply yes or no. Mm-hmm.
That is also an indicator to others. If, you don't know a person well, but they say a lot of words to just keep building on a point. In other words, if they feel that they have to do that, then it's like, why do they feel that way? Is it because they've had to do that in the past? That's their pattern. And so, it's like I read a post, or somebody read a post, and this thing was for sale for an unreasonably low price. But the person had to sell because their husband had been called up to service, their grandfather died. It was just one sob story after another. All the bells went off like this is a scam.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't have to go through all that if it were true.
Certainly raises questions.
It should to other people too.
Mm-hmm. But again, as far as a formal civil oath, that I believe anyway, is my opinion, and I think it's well grounded, especially in light of the fact that Jesus testified under oath, and God has often sworn, even by himself and all those other things, that a civil oath, formal oath like that is of a different nature than what Jesus is discussing here. But like we said, if somebody felt like this also applies to that kind of oath, then there are ways to get around that as well and not violate your conscience over that, thankfully. All right, treating others right involves refusing to retaliate. Now we're getting into territory from earlier. Maybe we can elaborate on some of that. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You've heard that it was said. But I say to you, don't resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Actually, that's the next part. I've already said quite a bit on this, but You couldn't say anything then, but you can now. If you have any thoughts or comments on that. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. What do you think of that? You like getting slapped on the cheek? Some people might, but we won't go there. It's kind of weird.
When you were talking about exacting punishment, that's what you can't do. That
Exact-
you can't
oh.
to children. It's not mine to punish you. Well,
Yeah,
once you
okay.
reach adulthood, government has the right. Even in the Old Testament, they had avengers of blood. It wasn't necessarily the person taking out,
Yeah,
exacting.
taking the law into their own hands in that way. Yeah. I'll just reiterate, like I mentioned this morning, that the point of that Old Testament law was not necessarily to justify retaliation, or wasn't to justify retaliation. It was to limit the punishment, at least as much as anything else. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, and a life for life. You see the matching, it matches. It's just, it is equal punishment. You don't get an eye for a tooth, but a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. You don't take a life for an eye. It's equal punishment. So that was the point of that Old Testament law, but it could be twisted to be used to justify getting even, or like Joe said, exacting punishment, or giving it back to somebody. And it's usually about you. You did it to me, so I'm going to do it to you. Now, if you did it to this guy, I'll probably stay out of it. But you did it to me. And that's where you went wrong, so I'm going to do it to you. So there's an inherent selfishness in that. Even if we don't think of it like that and it's a reaction, there's still Jesus, what he says here is trying to encourage against that or discourage that. Mm-hmm.
But later in Matthew, he specifically tells you that if somebody wrongs you or whatever, you have to deal with forgiveness. In your heart, there always has to be the element of a willingness to forgive for anything, and you got to get rid of it. Because he tells you, if somebody wrongs you, you don't punch them out. You go to them and say, this wasn't done right.
Yeah.
And so he tells you how to work it out.
And it's never evil for evil. Don't pay evil for evil. If slapping somebody in the face is wrong, then how could it be right to do it to them back? We say two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly.
That's a very good expression. There's truth in that. That is biblical truth. That something that's wrong is never right. It can't be right, ever. So there's nothing that can be done that can make a wrong be right. There are some things that can make something right be wrong, but there's never a thing that can make a wrong thing right. So if it's wrong to do something like this, it's also wrong. If it's wrong to walk up and slap somebody in the face, it's equally wrong to slap them in the face because they slapped you in the face. Jesus is talking about this self-denial and inherent difference in the way you react to people or interact with people than the world does, or that people generally might do in human nature, as we might call it. There are things bigger than you in life. So don't get tripped up on you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, he tells us we are to love others as we love ourselves. And then the phrase, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So obviously, and like you said, we have to care enough to become a Christian. We have to want to save ourselves. Once we get it right with God, all we try to do is have others get right with him too. So, I mean, you know.
It should be, yeah.
There are times, might be a good idea if somebody's out of control, you smack them. Just, do you know what I'm saying?
If they're falling asleep at the wheel, maybe,
No, if somebody's
then you slap them.
Well, you know, let's change cheeks and say, oh, if somebody grabs you on the cheek, let them grab the other, turn the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, that's not, not appropriate or whatever. And so, in the same token, if the action originally would have had to have been somewhat appropriate or approved in terms of these things, because if they were inappropriate, like I said, God doesn't approve of that.
Yeah, if we're talking about something that, I mean, it wouldn't apply to every action that somebody could do to a person to let them do it more, But in this case, it's an insulting kind of thing. I think that's the slapping in the face would be an insult, yeah.
Well,
So
that's why I think it is a limited application in it, because obviously there are things that are excluded from that. And Ken brought up a good point prior to the lesson this morning. He said, how do I know I've been mistreated?
yeah,
And it's like, we sometimes assume we're being put upon, but are we really? So I think the way you phrased it this morning and this evening is good, that you're looking at the general focus, self-centeredness. And, I had a good friend that would always say, well, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and I'm the Lord's servant. So the logical following is I can mete out his
yeah,
vengeance.
I will be his sheriff or whatever, yeah.
And God doesn't ask us to do that.
Yeah, that's exactly the opposite of what he meant when he said, vengeance is mine, yeah. Wayne, and then Debbie had,
Well, this morning when we were dealing with lust, that word hyperbole and exaggeration. In other words, I look at this in the same manner. He's not telling you to stand there and let somebody beat you to pieces. He's telling you that your heart can't be one that wants to get even in some way with that person. In other words, turn and walk away. Do what's right, but not just to stand there and allow them to continue to abuse you.
Absolutely. We're not talking about, getting beat up or anything like that. And I think Jerry Barber used to always say, he says, if they slap you on the one cheek, you let them slap you on the other cheek. But then that's the end of it. He doesn't. It's not an infinite thing. Like, well, then you turn the other one again, and you just keep going until you're dead. He literally slaps you by your dead. And if somebody sues you for your tunic, let him have your cloak also. But he doesn't. I mean, it's not intended to be an indefinite thing. Well, then you give him your pants, and you give him your sandals, and you give him everything. And then if he forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. But he doesn't say, then go with him 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then you just keep walking. But obviously, there's a principle here. And I think it goes back to that selflessness and self-denial. Debbie? If I didn't go too long to make you forget.
Life is hard, and some people can be. Just an example, when I was working at the assisted living, and this old man broke me, and I just walked out of the room. He didn't have dementia, he knew what he was doing. And then I went in the office and then I got mad. And then I went back in and told him he was never to do that again, but he did other things worse too, the AIDS. And if the man had said, Debbie, I don't know what got into me, I am so sorry. It would have been different.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't. He said, it's your job to keep us all in heaven. Okay? Now, I don't like the man. And
I can see why.
And we finally got rid of him. He needed to be gone a year before because he'd been doing this stuff for a long time. And where he went, he got kicked out of there for the same thing. So there are times that, I'm sorry, I can't just be perfect and say, oh, that's okay. But he's not going to stop it. He's doing worse with my age.
Yeah, I think you did the exact right thing in that instance by telling him that. I think to what Jesus is talking about would have been, I mean, what you did to apply to that would be to go in there and, wrong him, beat, smack him or punch him in the face or something like that. But you did the right thing by saying, don't do that. Jesus, to use your example, and kind of like what Jay said, don't resist one that's evil. He doesn't mean you sinned because you shouldn't resist that man,
I didn't like him then. I thought he was great. That's Kenny Forever guy. But after that happened, I saw a totally different person.
Yeah.
And I didn't like him, and I don't like him.
But, I mean, for good reason. Jesus said you can know a false teacher by his fruits. Well, that applies to all people. You know a person by their fruits, and he showed his fruits in doing that. So you did, I think, at least as a first step, exactly what should have been done. Say, don't do that. Period. That's wrong, and not going to put up with it. Yeah.
I think one of the worst things you can do is not point it out. You're not helping that person.
Yeah.
Like, you can't retaliate. You can't, get vengeance against them. But if you don't point it out, you're not being a friend to them at all. If you just sit there in silence and let it go on, you're not helping them
Yeah.
in any way.
Or other people, yeah.
Yes. So I think that's actually helping him, even though you don't find him pleasant, which he knew that he was.
It gave him an option to think.
Yeah.
You could have walked in there and cut his hand off.
Well, you could, or worse.
But that would not have been the best thing to do. It may have been satisfying, but it would not have been right. So,
My mind didn't go to anything like that.
well, I didn't think it did. I was just being extreme.
Disgust and dislike.
Yeah.
But you're not even supposed to have that, really. But I can't.
Well, sin is disgusting. It should be. So, there's a difference between doing what Jesus is saying here and permitting evil as far as you can control. If you let somebody do that kind of thing freely, you have become equally wrong as he is because you're allowing it to happen. But you, in that case, you went to him and said, I won't allow this, and therefore I think that's exactly what Jesus would have. I mean, that is if you make that man a brother in Christ, then that is exactly what Jesus said to do in that instance. If he was a Christian brother, he would have said, you go to him and you tell him what he did and tell him his fault between you and him alone, and that's exactly what you did. Even though wasn't a Christian, he was a human, and so I think that's exactly appropriate.
The Lord never commanded us to like everybody, did he?
I hope not.
Exactly. Our command was to love everybody or do what was best
Yeah.
in the situation. So you don't ever have to like him.
Yeah. Don't repay evil with evil. It's repay evil with good. And even if you don't take that kind of thing to be good, which I think it is good ultimately to approach somebody like that, you still didn't repay him with evil, and that's the key, and that's why it would be a commendable thing. And it also gives that man an opportunity to evaluate himself, and sadly it sounds like he didn't. But God will repay. God will judge. Give to the one who begs from you. This is the next one. Treating others right involves not refusing people. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. We dealt with that a little bit, and I actually got into it more than I intended to earlier this morning. But there are ways to help people by giving that, we might feel uncomfortable giving in certain ways, money or something like that. And I already said that I personally don't give people money unless, in very rare circumstances, but as a rule, I do not do that because it has nothing to do with that particular person. Just as a rule, as a principle, if somebody is hungry, they need food. They don't need money, they need food. And so on and so forth. They giving somebody that I have no idea who they are money just opens the door for them to use that money for things they don't need, or maybe, other things questionable that I would then be enabling. So I would rather give in other ways. And there are, once you look at it that way, there are a long list of ways that we can help people that actually will help them in a direct way, and instead of just money. But again, Jesus is not saying that you have to give everybody everything that they ask for. He just is, again, in a selfless way, don't refuse people just because you don't want to be bothered or take the trouble to help them.
As single women especially, if somebody, I've seen people prey on, especially older women, asking for money. They identify people and set them up for unsafe situations. Generally speaking, like there was a lady that begged one time, and I'm like, come with me to the church. And no, she didn't want, churches didn't help. Then I knew, So the way I look at it, a lot of times the best way to give is to give through the church and through, so that the Lord gets the glory instead of you.
Yeah, and probably should throw in here along with this that there are always people who are going to be taking advantage of people and churches. Churches are very easy to take advantage of, and people that are professionals at this kind of thing, they know that churches will help. They know that, number one, that churches generally have a lot of money in the bank as a rule, especially big denominational churches. And number two, they know that they're generally going to help because of Jesus, basically. And so people are going to cheat churches, and they're not really in need, like in an urgent way, but they make a living of sorts going around to churches and getting to live however they want and go around the country or whatever, because they get rooms and they get rides and they get all this stuff. The point we could probably make in this connection is, not in every instance, but Paul's principle about allowing yourself to be taken advantage of rather than, doing wrong is something to think about in that case. If I help somebody who turns out really didn't need help, that's not a reflection on me. I still help that person. And it shouldn't keep me from helping the next person that might need help. As far as I was concerned, I did exactly, it doesn't matter if the person was cheating me. God still smiles on that as if they weren't. They were genuine and sincere. So I shouldn't use that as an excuse to never help anybody. There are, like I already said, legitimate reasons and concerns why we may not want to give money to people, but we can still help people in other ways. Sure, there's going to be exceptions that are taking advantage, but hey, that's a totally different matter entirely. Luke's account goes even farther than this. Matthew does include the don't refuse somebody who would borrow from you, but look at what Luke's account says in Luke 6. He says, "From one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount." Now, this just is getting harder and harder, isn't it? What kind of a person lends things to people and intentionally doesn't want to get them back or doesn't expect to get them back? Now, we might be in a situation where we've lent something and they never gave it back, but we don't want to deal with a confrontation, so we just kind of keep waiting, and we wish they would bring it back, but we're not going to say something because it's awkward and this or that. But Jesus says, lend to somebody and don't even expect to get it back. And I don't think he's necessarily talking about things, but money probably is something that we might, loan somebody $20 or, whatever, and they never give it back, they never bring it up, they never offer. It can be irritating, can't it? It's like, if I borrowed $20 from somebody, I would give it back as soon as I could possibly do that. So how could anybody not do that? But Jesus, the principle here is, don't even think like that. Don't even be willing to lend somebody something like that, fully expecting to not get it back. Don't even want to get it back. Certainly don't expect to get $25 back, because that's what some people might do. I'll lend you. That's like what banks do. You get this much, I'll give you this much money, but you're going to give us this much money back. That's how banks are a business. People could do that too, interest. But that's far beyond what Jesus is talking about. He's saying don't even lend, not even expecting to get what you gave back. That's generous. That is another form of, that's just giving. It's not lending, it's giving in that case. But it's a very powerful principle. Finally, treating others right involves loving your enemies. So he says, you've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven. For He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain on the just and on the unjust. If you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Don't the tax collectors even do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, how many times have you heard He makes His sun rise on the just and the unjust? And the rain, He sends the rain on the just, or on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust. What is the point of that statement in this context? What's He getting at? He says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Don't just love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Or don't just love your neighbor. What does God making the sun rise on the evil and the good have to do with this? Yeah, Wayne?
He's showing He loves both. Christ died for both. Only those who follow will be saved in Him.
Yeah.
And so, as He has pointed out, love your enemies. He does. Pray for those who persecute you. Jesus prayed on the cross to forgive all those who just put Him there.
Mm-hmm.
We have to try to have that type of attitude.
Yeah, God loves and provides in His own way for all. So let's just say for here, this will help us maybe understand. Let's just pretend for a second that you and I have the ability and power to make the sun rise or to send rain. Who are we going to send it? Who are we going to give it to? Well, we could give the rain only to the people we like. Those people, I'm going to make sure it never rains over there. And their yard and their crops and everything are going to be like a wasteland, because I'm not going to give them rain. I'm only going to give rain to the people I like. Does God operate like that as far as earthly, physical things? No. That's what Jesus is saying. God makes the Father makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust. So the things that we are in our power to give and to offer, like our love and our concern and our aid, whatever we have to give, we shouldn't discriminate, especially our love and our prayer. We should love our enemies even. We should pray even for the people who persecute us. Like Wayne said, Jesus did as they were doing it. Jesus doesn't even suggest that we should do it as they're doing it to us, but maybe after the fact or something like that. But that's His point of saying that the Father makes His sun rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the just and the unjust is an example for us to love also our enemies, not just our neighbors and the people we like, but our enemies. Don't just greet your brothers, because everybody does that. And you see the contrast with us and the world, His kingdom and the kingdom of the world now. Even the tax collectors do that kind of thing. Even the Gentiles do that kind of thing. So the implication is you need to go above and beyond that. You need to go above that. Pray for your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Love your enemies. And again, like Joe said earlier, this is the kind of love that is not necessarily a feeling, because most of us, if not all of us, we don't control our feelings. Feelings just come up and then they might go away. They flare up, sort of against our will. But what this kind of love means is something we do control. It's the mind. It's a love of the mind, a love of the hands. I'm doing things for them. I care for them. I'm concerned about their well-being. I may not have fuzzy, wuzzy feelings about them. I may not love them the way I love my children or my wife or my mother and father or anything like that, but I can love them the way Jesus says I need to love them, by seeking their best interest and trying to help them, and if nothing else, I can pray for them. Mm-hmm.
You know, I think 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 10 is kind of explaining it more completely when he goes, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. So when someone is begging from you, I think what he's trying to say is there's a willingness in your heart to help the other person. And the concept of giving means you don't expect it back.
Mm-hmm.
But you should be happy that you have the ability to do it because God gave it to you.
Yeah, and that is how to be a cheerful giver. That's what it means to be a cheerful giver, is to do it openly, willingly, eagerly. That's what a cheerful anything is. It doesn't mean you have a smile on your face while you do it. You can do that and not be cheerful at all. That could be a front. But a cheerful anything is somebody who you do it regularly. If it's something you like to do, you do it a lot. It's a pattern of behavior. So a cheerful giver is a giver that gives and gives and gives, and not with ulterior motives like charging interest or, hey, if I scratch your back, you'll scratch mine, and that kind of thing. All these are the ways of the world. Jesus just puts these kinds of things on another level, raises the bar, the standard of a moral code and integrity, that if the world would operate by them, the world would not be the world. It would be a totally different place. So, to be a disciple of Christ is to be different, be perfect. We didn't even get into that, but be perfect as your Father is perfect. Just do good in general. Be different. Be sons of your Father in heaven.